Now it's time for some New York Mets baseball talk. Here's Gary Mack bringing you the latest news and analysis from Mets Nation and the world of baseball on another edition of Mets Musings.
And hello and welcome to another edition of Mets Musings, episode 346, and we got a special one for you tonight. We had a big round table the other day, and it was four of us here, special guests, Brett Topel on the phone, Greg Prince in the house, Jeff Cohen in the house, Len Aberman of Baseball and Barbecue, Jeff Cohen, of course, Baseball and Barbecue, all here in the new studio, the different studio. You see, it's a different look. And we had a big Mets roundtable discussion about what the Mets should do. And I am not going to delay any longer. We're going to get right to it just in a second. But I hope you'll enjoy it. We had a blast doing it. And just sit back and enjoy it. And again, my guests who I introduce are the boys from Baseball and Barbecue, Jeff Cohen and Len Aberman, Greg Prince, and Brett Topel. So sit back and enjoy it. All right, and welcome. And this evening we are having a very special get-together here. We're having a Mets fan forum, if you will, with some really terrific guests. So I'm going to introduce them all, let them all say hi, and then we'll get into it. We've got Len Aberman from Baseball and Barbecue.
Hey there.
Jeff Cohen from Baseball and Barbecue. The boys are in the studio.
Yep, we're here.
And the great Greg Prince, author extraordinaire, is here, author of Piazza, Faith and Fear in Flushing, and the other one escapes me right now, Amazing Again.
Good morning or afternoon or evening, whatever time we're saying this is.
And on the phone with us is the equally extraordinary author, Brett Topel, and Brett's been with me a number of times on the show. Brett's the author of So You Think You're a Met Fan, Miracle Moments, so many. When Shea Was Home. Brett, welcome to this forum.
It's great to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure. So, guys, we're going to start with some Mets questions here. The Mets have a new GM, Brody Van Wagenen, or whatever.
Agent extraordinaire.
Agent extraordinaire. Let's go around the table and get people's thoughts. Greg, we'll start with you.
Welcome to Brody Van Wagenen, erstwhile agent extraordinaire, new general manager of the New York Mets. It's a weird hire. We could call it innovative if we want, I suppose, because nobody else lately has hired a super agent to run a baseball team. It's not totally without precedent, I suppose, in professional sports, but it did seem to come a little bit out of the blue, especially in the context of having other candidates who seem more traditional. But hey, it's not like the Mets were getting anywhere before Brody Van Wagenen. So if this guy can bring the things he does well, recognizing talent, negotiating with talent, bringing them over to his side in a way that is not a conflict of interest, let's say that it's not a terrible idea and hope for the best.
All right. Brett, what's your thoughts on the hire?
Well, I agree. I think it's an outside the box choice, but the Mets were really in a way in a no-win situation here, because if they would have picked somebody like Doug Melvin or a more traditional candidate, people would have said, "Oh, they're doing the same thing that they've always done." And it had come down to Brody Van Wagenen and Chaim Bloom of Tampa Bay, and I think either one would have been a sort of an odd or outside the box choice. And I think we got to give this one a little time. I think the hope is that listen, by all accounts, Brody Van Wagenen is a smart baseball guy, and I think if he can bring something new to the Mets that they haven't seen recently, then I think that's great. The question is whether the Mets are going to allow him to do what he needs to do.
Jeff?
Well, again, I'm in agreement. I think he's a very polished negotiator. He's been in the game a while. I do have to question his sanity because I read where he was making like $25 million as being an agent, and he's not going to come anywhere near that. So he must be taking this on as a challenge, and if he can turn the Mets around, great. If not, it's the same old, same old. So it's really a no-lose situation, and I agree that if the Mets hired anybody else, they were going to be criticized no matter what.
Len, your thoughts?
Okay, so I heard you the other night. You said it was interesting. I agree. It's interesting. I don't know about the whole recusing himself from these negotiations on these players. That should be interesting. Who's going to do the negotiating? It's going to be interesting to see him go from trying to get the most for a player and now trying to give the player the least amount. So that should be an interesting turn of events. And, we will see.
Yeah, that's one of the things I talked about last week on the show about how is he going to do this. He says he's going to recuse himself, and I'm sure he probably will do some of that. But it's going to be an interesting situation to see. Maybe he'll be innovative. Maybe he's got some ideas to do some innovative contracts here. We won't know, of course, until the time comes. But we'll have to wait and see. Now, one of my gripes that wasn't on our list, but I don't think he was treated fairly. If you listened to last week's show, I think it's last week's show, but I went off a little bit on Mike Francesa for the greeting he gave Brody Van Wagenen to New York, and I was not happy about that. I just thought it was a terrible way to he complained all the time, Francesa did, that the Mets weren't allowing anybody to come on his show or on FAN at all, and he finally gets the new general manager, and then he goes after the guy and attacks him. I just thought it was terrible. Any thoughts on the Francesa interview real quick? Greg?
Mike who?
The sports pope.
Jeff?
It was terrible, but that's typical Mike. I mean, that's what he does now. He became what was a very good broadcaster years ago. Now he's a caricature of himself.
Yeah, I think so. Len?
You said on your show, which was very funny, that if Brody Van Wagenen didn't like working with certain people on the Mets, he can get rid of people. You know how to get rid of people. I thought the Godfather music should be playing at that time, and maybe that's what we got to do to Mike. We got to get rid of the guy.
Brett, any thoughts on that interview? Yeah, I think that Francesa kind of feels the boat sinking a little bit, and he has not done as well coming back as he probably thought he did. And I think he's looking, the famous sports writers and sportscasters lament is they don't want to be the ones making headlines, and he's the exact opposite. I think he's looking for some headlines, and I think he's looking for anything to keep his show afloat at this point.
Well, he wants the $8.99 a month for the app, the sports app. You got to do something.
I'd rather get a Big Mac.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go to our next question or topic, as we want to know that the Mets have got some holes. Let's be honest. Even though Brody Van Wagenen said he's very happy with the day-to-day lineup, he knows it too. I mean, if you listen to the interview, he says they have some holes. What moves do you think the Mets should be making to improve this year? Brett, let's start with you this time.
Well, I think that the first move that they should really be worrying about and taking care of is getting a solid catcher on this team. If they're going to continue to build this team with these pitchers and keep DeGrom and keep Syndergaard, which I think they will do and I think they should do, then they need a solid catcher. Whether it's somebody like a Realmuto or somebody like that who's 27, who's controllable for the next couple of years. And if that means giving up, somebody like Steven Matz or, Wheeler's not really worth that much. He becomes a free agent coming up. But I think that you can't, if you look back historically, the Mets are always known as this, pitching-rich organization, but every one of those pitching-rich teams had a really solid catcher, whether it's, going back to Grote or Gary Carter or and Piazza. So to me, their first order of business should be catcher.
Okay, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, they've basically been using, if you guys remember the Johnny Bench pitch back, you'd sit up in your backyard and you throw it and you hoped it would come back to you, is basically how the Mets have been going for what seems like the last 10 years or so. Real Muto is a hard mountain to climb, only because I think a lot of people are looking for him, and the Marlins have such a strange value system in terms of what they could possibly want. But I guess Grandal is out there, who is not exactly a catcher, but he does play the position and he does hit. You need a center fielder. You hope Lagares is healthy and can play at least half the time, but I think I heard the phrase strength up the middle from Brody, now that we're on a first-name basis, and I don't think he means second and short. So catcher, center field, and while we're dreaming, a whole new bullpen, or at least something resembling an island of stability out there. I don't think they know what they've got. So he's got a few things to do, but there is a nice little core, which I don't think I would have believed. I don't know, last June or thereabouts when they were sinking into the East. So I don't think he was out of line to say I like our lineup and things like that. I don't think coming to town and saying, God, what a mess this is, was going to endear him to anybody. So, have at it.
I agree. I mean, what did you expect him to say? He's got to be positive. He's got to be positive for the fan base. He's still trying to sell tickets, So, it was crazy that again, getting back to Francesa, going after him for saying those things. But, you expect him to say that. Jeff, what's your thoughts on what the Mets need to do?
Well, I think they really need to settle on a first baseman and stop this revolving door around first base, be it Bruce, Alonso, or Smith, or Flores. I mean, get an everyday first baseman.
It could even be Cespedes. He wants to play first base when he comes back.
Well, Cespedes, exactly right. So they really got to do something with that. I agree with the catching situation. There's a couple of free agents out there. Wilson Ramos is out there. But yeah, they need someone who's going to solidify that position. As Greg mentioned, center field. There's a name out there who's fallen out of favor with the Twins, Byron Buxton. He might be able to get for cheap. I know he didn't have a great year last year, but he's still only 24 years old, and he was really highly rated for center field. So that might be a name that the Mets might want to target. And also, they got to upgrade the third base position. I mean, Frazier's a nice guy and all, but like I said before, he can't live with a 210 batting average. That's just terrible.
Len?
Well, I'm one of the people that thought that they should have made a trade this season, trading those pitchers. I think DeGrom or Syndergaard or both. They didn't. They held on to them, and now that they've got them, they've got to win now. But they've got so many holes at all these positions, and the problem with them is they either make one big purchase of one big player in the off season, or they make a lot of little players. I remember when the Mets' big acquisition one year was when they purchased Diamond Vision. So they, the problem is they've got to do more than just the one player. They can't just get a Bobby Bonilla like they did one year, or a George Foster as they did one year, or a Cespedes one. They've got to fill the positions. They can't be afraid to spend the money. They need to get a catcher. Like Jeff said, first base is an issue. The whole, we'll just put him at first base. Ask Keith Hernandez if anybody can play first base. It's not the easiest position to play, and they have all these players that they think they're just going to put at first base like it's their DH spot. So they need a bullpen. And they definitely need the catcher, because if they are going, like Greg said, if they're going with these pitchers, they star pitchers, which they are. Syndergaard, DeGrom, Wheeler, Matz, right? These guys, they're very good pitchers. They've got to have someone better than a pitchback to throw to. So there's just so many holes on the team that I worry that they're just not going to, be able to fill them all in one off season. Not the way they do it.
You mentioned pitching. Should we trade a pitcher for more hitting? And really, what is out there that would you really want to break up the pitching staff to include? I mean, there's no real catches other than Real Muto.
Right, but what's it going to take to get him? It might take a pitcher.
It's going to take. I don't think a pitcher's going to do it. I think it's going to take minor leaguers. I think it's going to be an Alonso, maybe a Justin Dunn, maybe a David Peterson, and maybe even somebody else. Maybe they would take a Matz to throw in to have somebody at the major league level, but I don't think it's not going to be one pitcher unless it's a Syndergaard or a DeGrom, and even then I'm not sure. And then what's the sense? Any thoughts on that? What do we take to get a Real Muto? Greg?
I think in general, for a team that is coming off back-to-back losing seasons, you can't have too many sacred cows. I remember using that phrase when Alderson took over, and that's when we had kind of franchise players like Wright and Reyes and Beltran, at least for another year. You're not going to. I wouldn't think you're going to touch Conforto. Not probably unless you make a big signing. Are you going to be looking at Rosario or Nimmo? Well, I think we've all fallen in love with Jeff McNeil, based on two very pleasant months. But everybody else, sans your top pitchers, unless you're just breaking up the gang, I guess is up there. Now the question is any of that useful to anybody? And we keep kind of going around and around. My problem is I tend to, if not fall in love, then fall in like with the guys I like. And there's about 8 guys I don't want to get rid of.
Exactly.
But I completely understand. I haven't given you a specific answer here, but basically anybody who I haven't mentioned, they should feel free to shop.
Jeff?
What was the question again?
Should we trade him?
Oh, right. Yes. Right.
And what is going to get Real Muto?
It's not going to be major league talent because we know that the Marlins are trying to get controllable young players. So you're right. The David Petersons of the world, the Justin Dunns, the Anthony Kays of the world. Maybe Max, because I think he has the longest to go to free agency. Because I know Wheeler is next year, and then the year after is DeGrom, and then Syndergaard. So Max is like fourth on the list. So maybe Max. But it's got to be a proven hitter. It's got to be someone like a JT Realmuto who can fill a couple of holes.
Len, your thoughts?
As I said, I think it might take a young pitcher. It might take, like Jeff said, it's somebody. The Marlins want players who are controllable, are low priced. But the problem is the Mets minor league system, even though they are building it up again, is not that strong. And if you do trade a couple of your top minor leaguers, you're going to be back to having a depleted farm system. And that was the reason again why I thought they needed to trade one of these big pitchers, because the whole thing is that they're not winning with them. They went 2 years straight where they had losing seasons. Yes, this season was a little better than last year, right? Okay. But it's still the same results. So, yes, they've got great starting pitchers, but nothing else. So are we going to just keep doing the same thing over and over? And that's the whole insanity, right? Doing the same thing and expecting different results. So I just thought that they should trade one of those guys. They didn't. But I don't even know if they have what is going to get Real Muto, or, do they have enough?
I think they do probably in the minors, but as you say, do you want to deplete the minors to get Real Muto and have a chance of winning, because she's still not guaranteed? Brett, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with pretty much everything you guys are saying. I mean, the Mets are the only team that could lose 90 games every year and have all these untouchables on the roster. But I think that, given the history of these highly touted Mets prospects, and we could all go through the list: Lastings Millage, David West, Sean Abner, to name a couple. I wouldn't be afraid to trade anybody. I mean, I would, if the Marlins want Alonso, then you can give the Marlins Alonso. We know what Realmuto is. We know what Alonso is in AA and AAA. I would trade Jeff McNeil if the Marlins want him. I know we fell in love with him for a couple of months, but none of us really know who Jeff McNeil is. And I have to be honest, I love him, and I know we all love him. Brandon Nimmo should be available to be traded as well, because if he's going to bring back an established catcher, or to Greg's point, a center fielder, then Nimmo is not an everyday center fielder in Major League Baseball in my mind. So if we're going to be able to bring one of those type of players back, then I think anybody is other than DeGrom and Syndergaard, and I agree that Conforto and Rosario should stay. But other than that, I think Van Wagenen should be pretty open-minded as to who can go.
All right. Well, none of us here, I don't think any of us are a big fan of analytics. But the big call is to hire more people. So the question is, should the team hire more analytic people under the Brody Van Wagenen regime? Brett, let's start with you. Should the team hire more analytics?
I think the team is going to hire whatever Brody Van Wagenen thinks he needs to run this team. I agree with your intro. I'm not a big analytic guy. I'm more of a baseball guy, and I like the way the game's always been played. I don't like the way that somebody like Dave Roberts is seemingly told how to manage a World Series from upstairs. I don't like any of that, but the fact of the matter is they hired this young agent, and I don't truly know what his feelings are 100%. He's not I don't think he's Theo Epstein, who I wish he was, quite frankly. If Theo Epstein is going to come in and do analytics, I'll deal with it. But my feeling is, analytics or not analytics, whatever Van Wagenen needs to build this team into a winner, I'm okay with.
It's interesting that you mentioned Dave Roberts and getting managed from upstairs, but that's not really the first time we've heard that. And going back years, Al Campanis, you guys had him on your show, his grandson. Did he mention that about how Al Campanis had a direct line down to the dugout, and he would call and tell, I guess it was Walter Alston at the time.
Yeah, it must have been, yeah.
Tell him what he thought he should be doing and to bunt in certain situations. So it's really, I kind of thought it was a new thing under Alderson and this current generation of general managers. But apparently it's gone on before, and those teams did okay. But I agree. You don't want the general manager running your lineup and everything, and that gets into a whole other thing with Callaway. I thought he did better after Alderson was gone, but that's another question. Let's get back to this question. Analytics department, Greg.
Analytics is a big umbrella, I think, especially for guys like us for whom it's a little bit of a foreign language, because it's something that was not in baseball when we fell in love with baseball, and suddenly people are telling you got to have this, and throwing all these phrases that I know Gary, you and I have talked about in the past, like launch angle and exit velocity, and we're like, what the hell is that? Just get the batter to the plate. But it's all it's part of the tool kit that I think any general manager, any organization is going to have. And, to know that there are teams out there that are looking for every possible advantage and hiring the kind of people who understand these advantages and putting them to play, and knowing that the Mets have three guys who perhaps, I think it's, no matter the sort of foreignness that it has to us and a lot of fans, I think it is already part of the game. So the more advantage you can look for, I'm all for it. I would assume that, Van Wagenen will get what Van Wagenen wants, and I'm sure he's very well versed in it, because to make his various cases with other teams and arbitration and things like that, he's had to look at all kinds of numbers. So, a greater comfort with that can't be bad. I mean, when you watch baseball today, especially in the postseason, but you see it during the regular season, you're so used to watching line drives up the middle and thinking, all right, it was caught, because people now know to a T as much as possible where to position fielders, which is part of analytics. And it's not great when you're watching, especially when your team isn't bad. It's great when your guys are in the field. You know, it probably made a better second baseman out of somebody like Jeff McNeil than we had a right to expect based on scouting reports, because somebody knew what he was doing to position him. Even going back to Daniel Murphy, when he always played what I thought was on training wheels late in his tenure as a Met. That was Tim Topel working with him, and presumably based on something more than gut instinct. Where to position a guy who couldn't play second base to turn him into a second baseman. So. It's here. We can't, it's hard to turn back the tide. So I would assume we'll see more. And, probably in a few years, it won't even occur to us quite so much that it's weird. It'll just be a part of what baseball is.
Jeff?
Greg makes a great point, but you would think that the players, the hitters, would make some adjustments. I mean, if they're going to position you that you know where you're going to hit, well, don't hit it there. I know it's easier said than done. I mean, we spoke to Greg Luzinski once and said it's easier said than done. But you know what? You lay a couple of bunts down the third base line. Guess what? Soon they're going to have to defense against that, and the defense will have to adjust. So you have all these mind games going back and forth. So you adjust one way, adjust another way. That's the way I think it's been. For years, obviously years and years, decades and decades. But when you thought about if you read the I think it's the Eric Sherman book on Davy Johnson, Davy Johnson kind of claims that he invented analytics. He's the one who brought all with the computer stuff, and he used the bullpen that way. Which if I guess you can credit the Mets for creating analytics in baseball. Thank you very much.
But he also said that there's too much crap into that.
Oh, absolutely.
There's too much, and he said garbage in, garbage out, which is a thing they always said on computers. Greg?
Yeah, I just remember, Davy Johnson did bring us the computer. In fact, I think it was the cover of the information guide the first year he was there. But I also remember that, at a time where it was just kind of becoming innovative to say, hey, this guy shouldn't be hitting against a lefty or a righty. I remember, you guys will have to remind me, Bill Campbell, the reliever, he was a Cub at the time, but he was with the Red Sox. I remember he did a righty or a lefty. But Rusty Staub had a terrible track record against Bill Campbell. And he was a Philly in this particular game in '84. And Davey sent him up to pinch hit anyway, and he got a 3-run double. It was a big game right around the time the Mets were taking first place in early summer. And they asked Davey, Rusty was, 9 for 47, something maybe even worse than that. Why'd you send Rusty up there? He said, I had a feeling about it. Mm-hmm. And, you have to be willing to kind of, take your hands off the spreadsheets, I suppose. I think we saw that with Alex Cora. I think that's why, that was an edge to the Red Sox. Every now and then, you saw balls going through holes in the World Series, especially when the Red Sox were batting, which was a pleasant change, quite frankly, just as an observer from watching the Dodgers and Brewers, which was a very competitive series. But it's like, well, these guys have squelched each other off throughout the entire series. And I understand, of course, we need to play defense against your offense. And, well, we need to make these moves against you. It can be a little stultifying. So, the human element will eventually, inflict itself, shall we say, inject itself in the game. So, Davey was doing it back then. I think, there's been some form of this for years. Remember, Sandy Alderson was supposed to be the avatar of all of this, based on Moneyball. And, the fact that we had DePodesta and Ricciardi, and it was like, here comes the new brigade, and here we are 8 years later saying, gee, can we get some analytics up in here? So, I think it's all, as Jeff said, easier said than done.
Len?
Can I just chime in? I mean, I think that, we call it analytics now, but to Greg's point and to what you guys are saying, I mean, is it really much different than, platooning Mookie Wilson and Len Dykstra in the outfield? It's a new word, and, they have these young guys with all the computer, information, but, it's really just different type of hunches, right? I mean, it's controlled by numbers, sure, but Davey Johnson knew that a certain hitter batted better than against a righty than a lefty, and that was analytics in the mid '80s. So I think that they've been doing it. It's just we call it something different now.
Right, I agree with Brett. So if analytics works, great. There could certainly be a merger of analytics with managing by the seat of your pants. When the Yankees with their championship teams, would take tons of pitches so that they could get to the team's bullpen. Okay, that was a system. It worked. Analytics part of it works. This whole exit velocity and those things, I'm not a believer in that. I could care less. But there are certain things, these shifts, they're working. Now, like Jeff said, if the hitters can't hit out of them and they're working and they're not made illegal, and that's analytics, then I'm all for it. If it helps my team win, I'm all for it. Now, whether a team needs to have 10 analytic guys on the team, I don't know how many analytic guys does it take to screw in a light bulb. I don't know the answer, but how many do you need? What's the maximum and the minimum? But again, if it helps my team win, analytics.
Right, and Len made a great point. I mean, what we call this stuff, exit velocity, spin rate, launch angle, they're just code words for uppercut. He hit the ball hard, and he threw a good curveball.
Right. Exactly.
I mean, do really care? Did the guy really go up to the bat and go, "Oh, I better hit this at 24-degree angle when the pitcher's throwing it this hard"? I mean, they're not thinking that. They can't process that.
The problem with the way the game's going now, and I don't know if this is under the analytics part of it, but is that everybody's swinging for the fences. That's the problem too. Is averages don't matter anymore. Everyone's swinging for the fences. To me, everyone wants to see home runs. To me, one of the most exciting, things in baseball is a triple. That's exciting. So I don't know if that's considered part of analytics, but if that's changing the game, then I have an issue with it. But if it's helping your team win, I'm all for it.
All right, well, we're going to skip to some fun questions.
Those weren't fun? I'm rolling.
Well, lighthearted, questions here.
Nobody's thrown a punch yet. I mean, so.
All right, Lev, we'll start with you. Which do you prefer, Citi Field or Shea Stadium?
Oh, I gotta say, everyone called Shea Stadium, a dump, but it was my dump. And, I grew up with Shea Stadium. I remember walking through and the first thing you see is that the grass, and you just, and after just the ramps around, walking down the ramps, and I prefer Shea Stadium as far as, for sentimental reasons. If I'm looking at it from, which is a better stadium, I mean, Citi Field is beautiful, but for me, Shea Stadium will always hold a place in my heart.
Jeff.
Well, I'll do my best for my princess. Okay, let's be honest, okay? Okay, let's be honest.
Can I get you a Diet Coke?
Give me a Diet Coke. Look, Shea Stadium has the history. Well, it was a dump, but it was all dump, and it has the history. It has the Tom Seaver performed there, and so did Dwight Gooden and Darryl. I mean, that has the history. But as a stadium, I got to go with Citi Field. When you go and get concessions, you can actually see the game. Let's put it honest, the restrooms are much better than at Shea Stadium, but Shea Stadium has the sentimentality and the nostalgia, and I love Shea Stadium. I grew up there, but Citi Field is right now it's a better field.
Brett?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a little bit of a hard question to answer. I think we all probably agree that for nostalgia's sake, Shea Stadium is something that we remember fondly, and I'm actually really happy that Shea Stadium is remembered fondly, because the last couple of years at Shea Stadium, we were speaking no fond words about the stadium. It wasn't a great place as a fan to go see a ball game, although the sidelines were good. But you didn't want to be sitting in the upper deck at Shea Stadium, in April or even early May. As a fan, for a fan experience, Citi Field, I think, is obviously far superior for the reasons that a couple of you guys have mentioned already. But listen, Shea Stadium will be the place that my grandfather took me and my father took me, that I took my son. So there's always going to be a part of Shea Stadium in all of us that were fortunate enough to be there. But I mean, I think to be able to plunk down a bunch of money and have a good fan experience, I don't think there's any question that Citi Field delivers on that.
And let me just say, there's a book that immortalizes Shea Stadium, right, Brett?
Well, let me tell you, by 1975, for some reason, after 11 years, Shea Stadium was already in pretty bad shape, and by 79, it was basically dilapidated. But yeah, I appreciate the kind words. When Shea was home, available at all fine bookstores.
Plug it when you can do it. Plug it away. Greg.
Well, in 2019, I'm going to pick Citi Field because it's there. I sometimes wonder if they had just said, you know what, we have a perfectly good stadium and we're going to do something about upkeep and make some renovations. And if we were still going to Shea Stadium in 2019, at which point, it'll be year 56, and would it be talked about sort of in the somewhat hallowed tones that, say, Dodger Stadium gets from the same era? I think Shea Stadium had to go away to be truly appreciated for what it was, that it was this place, for, as everybody said, the green grass, and although, yeah, it could get freezing in April. It gets freezing in April at Citi Field, too.
Yeah.
I think it's worse at Citi Field. It has a lot more openings, but that's another story. Shea's product was baseball when the Mets were there, and you had nothing to distract you. And, the idea of plunking down a bunch of money, you didn't have to do that quite so much at Shea Stadium, although, prices were rising right up to the moment they closed it. Listen, Shea Stadium and the Mets were synonymous. And, not only, on a personal level for everybody whoever went there, but just, I still tend to, if I'm taking the train and they say, where are you getting off, I'll say Shea. And not out of any great... making a statement. It's just like, I can't say Mets Willets Point.
Right.
Or, I feel I should be getting a commission if I have to give advertising to Citicorp or whatever. I mean, listen, Citi Field, I've grown used to. 2015 kind of pulled me into the present where Citi Field was concerned, because I got to see a winning team there. Mm-hmm. And I got to go to a playoff game and a World Series game. And that was something that Citi Field did not have going for it for its first 7 or so seasons. Or I guess that was the 7th season. So I think secretly, because I'm older now and enjoy creature comforts, I probably don't mind that the seats are a little bigger and the concourses are more navigable. And yes, the restrooms are, if not state of the art, then certainly beyond state of the Shea. But there's always going to be a piece of me that wants to know where the hell Shea Stadium went, and why I can't go there tonight to see the Mets play the Reds.
What Greg said, being there for a playoff game and a World Series game, I was not able to do that at Citi Field yet, but I was there at Shea Stadium during those years, and I tell you, that upper deck rocked at Shea Stadium. It actually shook, and it was so much more exciting, I think, because I haven't experienced such the feeling yet at Citi Field. I mean, I've been to a couple big games there, but when Shea Stadium was rocking, it was literally rocking.
Game 4, 2000 NLCS, I was in the upper deck, that inning where it was like one double after another. I honestly thought I was going to fall to my death. because the thing was shaking like it had never shaken before. And, fine, if this is the way I have to go, tumbling however many feet while Todd Zeal is driving in Benny Agbayani or whatever, this is the way to go. I will say Game 3 of the NLDS in 2015, when Yoenis Cespedes launched a ball into the left field landing, or whatever its sponsored name was that year, I felt I was out in left field on the field level, I think either just inside or just outside of fair territory. It did vibrate, and that shocked me because I never felt anything like that at Citi Field. Also, we had Chase Utley being introduced to us that night, and if you were ever going to bring out every Mets fan's inner Shea, it was to feed us Chase Utley. And we were all pretty stoked. And, Mets fans will be Mets fans. So I think Citi Field kind of moved to another level for me that night. But, you know what? Let's get some more playoff games and have something to compare Shea Stadium
All for
to.
that.
I remember at Shea walking when you were going to the upper level and those little stone, the steps, and you were walking and you didn't want to look back, you don't want to look down because you were going high and there was nothing to hold on to. I remember just walking on they were little steps. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I remember is the rain delays at Shea. If you had a big rain delay, I mean like a deluge, the water was just pouring in. I remember it pouring over the ramps, and there was like no place to stand.
Yeah.
You had to stand because it was coming in from both sides, and you had to stand like right in the middle. Otherwise you're going to get soaked. It was right. It was a waterfall from both sides. But so those were two things I remember.
All right, two more quick questions, and then we'll wrap this up. Greg, you and I have been on Rising Apple and Metsian podcast numerous times together, and our good friend Michael Cohen, his big issue is erecting a statue of Joan Payson. First statue the Mets erect, and of whom? Greg?
I hope it's of Brody Van Wagenen by popular demand in about 2 years. Putting that aside, because he seems like a very humble guy and wouldn't want to draw attention to himself. Tom Seaver. I mean, I don't know how there isn't a Tom Seaver statue at this point. I wrote a thing on Faith and Fear 10 years ago on the eve of Citi Field talking about all the great things they could do to make it feel like the Mets home before we knew that it would take a while to do that. And I said, Tom Seaver statue. I could not have been the first person to have come up with that. I mean, you travel around the country if you're so inclined and fortunate enough to do so. Go to other ballparks, and it's not a wish list thing. We saw this week with the passing of Willie McCovey. You watching coverage on MLB Network. There's his statue, and it's not the only statue at AT&T Park. You can go around baseball and see several. The Mets have an apple out of a hat outside the ball, and that's great. I'm glad they didn't get rid of it. I'm glad they took it out of the basement at Citi Field after that first year. And it's nice, but it gives you something kind of not only from a logistics standpoint, meet me by the apple, that sort of thing, but it gives you something to rally around, something to identify with, and that's just an apple. Tom Seaver. I don't have to tell anybody on this call who he is, what he means to this franchise. Why we love Shea Stadium, why we love the Mets is probably because we watched Tom Seaver pitch for, 10 plus years or however long we did. It's insane that there's not a Tom Seaver statue. I remember a blind quote. It was 2009, first year where nobody was happy with Citi Field, and they were on the verge of doing the 40th anniversary celebration of the 69 Mets, and people were grumbling, where's the statue of Tom Seaver? And an unnamed Mets source said, at that time they had not yet sold the event out, and said, we can't even get people to come see the real Tom Seaver. What do we need a statue for? Well, that makes me proud. So, I don't think it's asking for much, and to our friend Michael's point, Joan Payson ought to be. I think there should be all kinds of,
right.
We could do this all day, and I won't run down the list, but there's no, just to have an alternate pick here besides Joan Payson and Tom Seaver, David Wright should have a statue soon. I mean, never mind retiring his number, which I think is a can of corn. I don't want to say a slam dunk because this is baseball. But I mean, David Wright is the one immovable Met who refused to be moved except by a bad back, who never wanted to leave, who never changed his story about wanting to be a Met from day one to day last. Somebody who every person who roots for the Mets now has a clear memory of. And, if you wanted to have David Wright jump the line even, I mean, Tom Seaver's my favorite player and always will be. But you know what? If you want to say, we are grabbing this momentum and this love that we feel for David Wright, and he's going to be not you know. I hate to say it because with his bad back, I guess he was a statue at third base at the end. But in all fondness for David Wright, put him on the list, and we could talk about other people, and you know what, there should be a little more in the budget than for one statue. So
yes, but the Mets will make one statue a year or every.
And it will
century.
be for either Fred Wilpon or Jeff Wilpon, I imagine. So.
Brett.
That I have to follow? Well, let me just say, first of all, on that last point, the Mets had no problem selling 10,000 bricks to people to go out in front of Citi Field, to display, but there's no statue of anybody. I think, listen, I think Seaver is clearly the first one that should go up. I'm fine if you want to put one up of Gil Hodges and David Wright and, Joan Payson and whoever else. I think the interesting thing is, and, I had the opportunity to go to Citi Field toward the end of the year with a group of kids, actually about 75 of kids for the school I work for, and what they noticed was they noticed the apple in the hat, and they noticed when they walked in it was a giant 42, which kind of looks like a statue in some ways. And, I explained, obviously, it was for Jackie Robinson, and they all know who Jackie Robinson is. But they said, but why is it here in the Mets ballpark? And that's a hard question to answer sometimes, because I think, obviously the Jackie Robinson rotunda was very important to the Wilpons, but they had no, it's all Jackie Robinson in that entrance, and there's no Seaver statue, there's no Casey Stengel statue, there's no statues at all, obviously. And listen, I think for a team that's had obviously many, many, many good players, I have yet to find anybody who put somebody ahead of Seaver on this list, and maybe one of you guys will. But to me, probably it's Seaver getting in his own way because he probably doesn't get along with the ownership, and the ownership is cheap and all blah blah blah. But the fact, I really hope, and I worry about this sometimes with the Mets, is I hope they don't wait till Tom Seaver is no longer with us to put a statue up, because I'd like him to be there when they put that statue up.
Absolutely. Yeah, and here's a little known fact. If you go into the Mets Hall of Fame, on the right, near the window, there's a small, maybe 2.5'3" statue of Casey Stengel. You can miss it very easily, but it's there. It's very small, but it's inside, and you have to look for it. There's also a statue of Casey Stengel in Hofstra on one of the roads I kind of found. But Tom Seaver. It's got to be Tom Seaver. Maybe have a statue will have the best moments, with Seaver and Cleon Jones on the knee, and David Wright, and maybe a conglomeration of several Mets.
Bill Buckner.
You know what? If Dwight and Darryl wasn't on the stuff so long, they could have been immortalized. But they were great Mets. Of course, let's not get into all that. But they could have been worthy of a statue one day. But my favorite is Tom Seaver, and it's got to be Seaver.
Glenn?
Brett, you said following up Greg was difficult, right? Following him. Think about it. I'm sitting here with two prolific authors, right? You've each written numerous books, and the only thing I've written is a grocery list. So, that's tough. But but as
long as you get coupons, you're fine.
that is true. I do get $2 off on a Ben and Jerry's ice cream. So
well done.
But I would say in this whole Me Too movement, maybe Joan Payson. The problem is if you put up a statue now of even Tom Seaver, okay, well Seaver you'd have the youngsters now. They would look and they wouldn't know who that was. So the David Wright idea would definitely catch the current fans. But you got to put Tom Seaver up, obviously. I think you got to put Casey Stengel up, Joan Payson. Maybe you make a statue of there's in my mind I see that picture of Casey Stengel. He's over at the wall talking to Joan Payson. So something with Casey Stengel and Joan Payson, but maybe they can splurge and do 3 statues. Get 3 for the price of 1. May I?
Well, there goes our analytics department.
Right. At Fenway they have a statue that it's called Teammates, And I think they had 4 players on there. I'm not sure if they were on the actual same team, but they were all Red Sox, and that might not be a bad idea as well. Yeah. I mean, I've gone to several stadiums, and they all have a statue of their. I mean, Bob Uecker has a statue. Two.
Bob Uecker
Two.
deserves a statue.
Len and I were in Philadelphia. There's a statue of their announcer, Richie Ash.
Harry Callis.
Harry Callis. It's Harry Callis. Yes, there's a statue of him out there in the stadium.
You know what? Get Jerry Seinfeld to pony up some money. He's a big Met fan, right? And he's at the games. Yeah, Jerry, can you, whatever you get from one episode of Seinfeld, can you build a statue? All right, we'll even put down there, donated by Jerry, or yada yada yada.
How hard would it have been to have named the section of left field Kiner's Corner? Right. How hard would it have been to name, one of McFadden's or whatever, call it Murph's? Put something. All these, I don't want to get too ahead of myself when it comes to talking about barbecue, but Blue Smoke may be a great brand. How hard would it have been to have partnered with Rusty on something like that and get the? I mean, there other than Mex's Keith's Grill, I guess it's called, with the Mex hamburger, which I think most people would forget existed, except he visits it twice a year on TV. There are all these opportunities to just make people, feel good about the Mets. When you talked about kids not knowing who Tom Seaver is, this is how they find out, because, hey, who's that statue of? It's Tom Seaver. He's true. the best player the Mets ever had. Certainly the best pitcher the Mets ever had. I mean,
maybe one of the best pitchers baseball's ever had.
Yeah, and how do you make sure that the best Mets pitcher is in that conversation? By continuing to, every time the game is on TV, there's a shot of the Tom Seaver statue. And that way, announcers just kind of naturally say, well, he looks like a young Tom Seaver out there, which, quite frankly, you don't hear enough for my money. The 42 is a good focal point. People do meet at the 42. People say, I'll meet you after the game, meet me by the 42. I see a lot of families who probably wouldn't otherwise have something to feel good about, gathering around the 42 and taking pictures. I think the Jackie Robinson Rotunda serves a good purpose. I mean, there's a George Washington Bridge in New York. George Washington's not from New York, but that's okay. Jackie Robinson played close enough. I don't mind the Jackie Robinson Rotunda. I mind that it stopped there.
Correct.
And there's so much more you could be doing with a ballpark other than, putting ads on the outfield fence and bombarding you between innings with offers to trade up and buy more tickets and help this sponsor out as if they are a charity. So I'm going off the rails here. I'll stop.
Well, I want to see what Gary has to say.
I forget the question then.
Statues.
I don't know. I love Michael Cohen's idea. And I have to give him credit. He's the first one that I heard, the Joan Payson, because without Joan Payson, we had Shea Stadium. William Shea played a major part in bringing the Mets back to New York, but we don't really have anything that honors Joan Payson anywhere. I mean, she's in the Hall of Fame, but we don't. There's no other display of thanks or emotion or whatever you want to call it towards her. So I think a statue, I love the idea of having a statue of Casey and her, and maybe you could just tweak it a little bit and stick Gil Hodges and make it a 3 statue. A trio.
A threesome?
A threesome, yeah.
A ménage à trois.
I think that would be a great way to honor this terrific lady who brought this team, who spent her money, big Giant fan, brought her back. She brought Willie Mays back to New York because she loved Willie Mays. And yes, did her heart get in the way sometimes of winning? I think in the early years, yes. I think it did because she was nostalgic for New York Giants baseball and she wanted a National League team. And I think she brought back players that she loved and pushed to bring them. And she hired Casey and George Weiss, who clearly were probably over the hill at that point in time. But I'd like to see her. Seaver, of course. without a doubt, greatest player probably in franchise history. David Wright, great idea. I think I've been a David Wright advocate for a number of years, and I've said it on numerous times about how I think that people say, well, he signed that big contract, wasn't worth it, but he got it for what he did as a Met and what he meant to this franchise as a face of the franchise and as a face of Major League Baseball. And that's why he got that contract, and he deserved every penny he got. Because if you just go back to the All-Star season, when the All-Star game was in New York, that guy was everywhere, all over TV. He was in the home run derby all the time while playing. He started in the game. I don't know how he had the energy left after doing interviews all over the place, all kinds of times. He was just Mr. Met without the big head. So, it was an honor to watch him play one more game and see him up at bat. And I don't care if he popped out, struck out. It's like a thing that if I could go to my golf roots a little bit with Arnold Palmer, when he was getting older and he started not playing in tournaments, and he says, I don't want to play, I'm terrible. People don't want to watch me play that bad. And somebody said to him, no, we want to see you. We don't care how you play. We want to see Arnold Palmer on a golf course. And that's what we're interested in. We don't care what you shoot. We don't really care. We want to see you with the Masters. And that was the same way with David Wright. We just wanted to see him play one more time. After all he went through, all the work he did, everything, to see him get out there one more time was just amazing. And I'm so glad. And I actually defended the Wilpons for allowing him this opportunity. And I think you have to thank them for that and giving us that opportunity. But we're running along now, and we want to get to other matters in another show. So I'm going to cut it off here if everybody's in favor of that, and thank my guest, Greg Prince.
Thank you.
Jeff Cohen.
My pleasure.
Len Aberman.
Thanks for
and
having
Brett Topel on the phone. Thanks, guys, so much for coming on and doing this.
Hopefully we could do it again.
Hopefully we can.
Thank you.
And we'll talk to you all next time. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. We had a blast here doing that. Little round table was really a lot of fun, and we want to try to do it again. So be sure to stay tuned for that. And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to thank all my guests, Brett Topel, Greg Prince, Jeff Cohen, and Len Aberman. And I want to thank you all for listening, and don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, wherever you listen to the podcast. Please hit that subscribe button. That helps grow the show and expand to new listeners. And until next time, remember to keep the faith, stay optimistic, and let's go Mets. Good night, everybody.